Drink with James, episode 167. Ladies and gentlemen, I was at the mothership last night. I went to Facebook, our benevolent overlord. I was there for a little chat, like a talk that they were giving. There was no, unfortunately I have no juicy gossip. There was no kind of huge insight or new product that I have to show you or tell you. And if they did have something secret and they told me and I told you, I like guaranteed I would be killed in my sleep before this thing even went out. So what was interesting though, there was a couple of insights that I thought were kind of like, oh yeah, duh moments, but something that I thought they articulated quite well. One was that, you know, they were talking about all advertising, but specifically through the lens of influencers. They're saying like, what makes an ad effective is being able to see the consumer being able to see themselves in that ad, right? Like if you think back to, you know, any ad that you like, you know, a lot of times, right, the brand is trying to, when they're reaching out to a certain community or a certain demographic or, you know, customer, they want that person to see themselves in the advertisement. And like, I think the influencers who have really engaged audiences, you know, and who are really successful, they have that, right? Like they have communities that see themselves in that person in some ways. And it doesn't have to be necessarily seeing yourself currently, right? Like the counterpoint to that would be like, well, what about Kim Kardashian? Like, she's only like half human at this point, so like, how could you see yourself in her? But there is like the ability to see yourself in a person right now, and I think that is like the influencers whose people say are like really down to earth and approachable and relatable, and that is like one way to go. There's the other of like everybody has a vision of what they could be or what they will be or what their future will be like, things that they aspire to. And we can see parts of ourselves in people much more successful, much better looking, you know, and generally like much more interesting than us, because we think like we are striving to that. And also there is like a delusion where you think you're like that person in some way, even though you're not at all. So I thought it was an interesting insight, and something to consider is just like, do you think your audience can see themselves in you? And it's part of the issue with some influencers that start off really relatable and then trend towards unrelatable. I think they lose their audiences because the audience wants them to be relatable and they no longer are, so they lose them. Whereas like, I don't think Kim Kardashian ever set out in life to be relatable, and so it works for her. She's always kind of been this like aspirational, depending on who you are, person living this ridiculous life. But it's worth thinking about if you built your audience on relatability and now your life is becoming unrelatable, what that is going to do to your ability to keep people's attention and then eventually sell that attention to your brand partners. So thank you, friends at Facebook, for packaging that up in a way that I felt was pretty easy to understand. Keep the intro short.
Anything else
from there? The other thing from last night that I thought was interesting was they talked about, and this is something we talk about internally with our clients, but with a little different language. They say that, you know, as a brand, before you pick an influencer and brief them on whatever the post is, you have to come up with an influential idea, right? So you have to come up with a concept that is compelling and then find the right influencer to execute that concept. I have mentioned the Ogilvy on Advertising book quite a bit in, you know, maybe 30 or 40 episodes. I was reading that book and I was bringing up examples from it a lot. But There's an Ogilvy quote where he says, when you see one of my ads, I don't want you to think it's creative. I want you to think it's so compelling that you buy the product. And that is the core of like what a good advertisement should do. And what Facebook was saying was like essentially an updated version of what Ogilvy was saying, was that like first you have to come up with a way to position that product so that to your audience it influences their decision making, right? Because your influence can only extend so far, right? Like it doesn't blanket everything. Gone are the days where an influencer can just be like, post something and be like, I like this, and it just sells out, right? Like that maybe used to happen years ago. It does not at all happen anymore. And so you have to be more strategic and think about what is the idea that I am trying to sell, and then how does that product relate to that idea, right? And so let's say you're working with a skincare brand and they're promoting a product that simplifies your skincare routine. So the influential idea is that skincare routines have gotten too complex, too many steps, too many products, selling you things you don't need for problems that don't really exist. And this product is a kind of all-in-one, one and done product that will totally simplify your skincare routine and go back to like reality, right? And go back to a place where we don't feel like we need to put 15 things on our face before we go to sleep. That idea that skincare routines are too complex is more compelling than maybe that product is, but you're kind of introducing them in tandem. I'll give one more easy example, which was like Warby Parker launched, and they didn't launch by saying, hey, here's these new glasses. They launched with the idea that you should be able to buy glasses online and try them on at home, and that glasses were too expensive. And that idea is really sticky, and it's hard to argue that. They just so happened at the time to be the only people offering a real solution to that, to say, hey, well, Warby Parker, you can try them on at home, and they're $95 instead of $300. The idea was the compelling thing, not the actual product, but the product and idea were so tightly fused together that you couldn't really separate them. So think about those two things, about how your audience is connecting with you, and about what the idea is that you are selling, and how the product that you're talking about relates to that idea. Question number one is, what is hiding likes going to do to Instagram? So, Instagram turned off likes in Australia on July 18th. We still get that data from our Australian influencers, so we are still seeing what is happening to engagement. So we had our in-house data scientists take a look at some of that data and try and answer that question of like, what the hell is happening? So from July 18th to today, we've got 2,200 influencers in Australia that we have data for across obviously hundreds of thousands of posts. What we saw was a 20% decrease in engagement overall. It wasn't an immediate drop, but it is part of a larger trend that we saw. Now, my caveat to this, and what we're still looking into, is that drop in engagement seems to be happening across the entire platform. Australia did fall more, like it did look like it was falling faster than the rest of the platform in general. But the rest of the platform in general is also showing a general downward slope in engagement right now. So we're looking into that, but I feel fairly confident saying that engagement has fallen in Australia since they turned off likes. That is in no way a surprise. You're going to be less likely to probably like something if you don't see that number out there. But I will say the fall was so far does not seem as steep as people might have guessed. And look, we've always been saying that this is not going to affect influencers at all. This is going to be great for influencers in general. And we tell our brands every chance we get that engagement is just not the right metric to be looking at when you are analyzing the success or the efficacy of an influencer. And another thing I saw last night at Facebook was that is something we've been telling brands, is that like engagement is the wrong metric to be looking at to try and understand if something works. And last night Facebook said the same thing, and they had graphs showing that engagement has no correlation with a post being remembered and being effective. So engagement has absolutely no correlation with a post's efficacy. The only thing it affects is the algorithm and that post's ability to be seen by more people. So in that way, engagement is important, but it is not important like whether a single person likes a photo or doesn't like a photo but sees it has no bearing on how effective that post is in like injecting that brand's story into that consumer's brain tissue. And even if tomorrow they turn off likes and engagement falls 30% across the board, it's not going to matter because it will fall 30% for everyone, right? And so the algorithm will shift with it. It's not like if your engagement falls 30% and everyone else's does, you're still at the same place relative to everybody else. So I don't think it's going to really change much. And I definitely think it's going to happen. So we might as well just get used to it. Question number 2, how do we at 4 evaluate and choose influencers for campaigns? What are the key kind of things that we look at? So just want to go through 6 kind of quick factors that we look at when analyzing influencers. First, reach, and more specifically, verified reach. We make sure that a person's reach is above average for their tier, meaning when you hit publish on a post, you are reaching more people with that post than most of your colleagues at the same following level as you. That is kind of a non-starter for us. If you don't have verified reach, it is very unlikely that we will work with you. If you're an influencer who hasn't worked with us and you're frustrated and don't know why and you haven't applied for verified reach, that is probably why. Number 2, engagement. And you might say, you just told me not to care about engagement and engagement doesn't matter. When combined with reach stats, engagement is a telling indicator of how well engaged someone's audience is. So for us, engagement without reach is worthless because it's so easy to purchase. But when we have the reach numbers and we can see engagement, it lets us know what to expect from this influencer and how they're going to perform within the confines of the algorithm as well. Number 3 is audience demographics. You can have amazing reach, you can have a huge following, you can have crazy engagement. If your audience isn't the right people that we are trying to reach, we're not going to work with you. I always say, like, a lot of times I get people coming to me saying like, hey, I worked with this influencer and they had 500,000 followers and it totally didn't work. And I look at the influencer and it is clear that the demographics are just completely off. Their audience is too young, they're the wrong gender, they're in the wrong income brackets, whatever it might be. It is important that the demographics match our goals, and we'll look at that every single time. Number 4, we want to work with influencers who are growing their following. There are few greater indications of success with an influencer than a following that is growing. Now you might say, wait, what about people who are doing giveaways? Do you think we're complete morons? Like, obviously we can tell when people are growing their following using giveaways, and if they are adding followers to their account but those people aren't actually engaged with their content, it means that the algorithm won't serve their content to those people. It means that their reach will be below average. It means they won't have verified reach. It means that we won't work with them. So again, number 5, percentage of sponsored content. If 50% of your content is sponsored, we're not going to work with you. If 40% of your content is sponsored, we will think twice about working with you. You can't have everything in your life be sponsored. There is no way a single person can like that much shit. And I don't want to see fucking commercial every single time I open Instagram. This is a whole existential threat for Instagram in general as it shifts from this entertainment and distraction tool, like engine, into a shopping and advertising platform. I think it loses some of its soul, and you just can't have half your posts be sponsored. We tell influencers under 25% is a good number to aim for. Go through your feed, go through the last 30 days, see what percentage of your content is sponsored, pay attention to that, try and keep it under 25%. The next is we look at how much sponsored content you're doing inside of that product category, right? So if you have promoted 4 fragrances in the last month, we are not going to be the 5th. We're not idiots, again. So we absolutely look at how much sponsored content you have done inside a specific category vertical or a specific product. You know, beauty, like you can do a lot of beauty posts, but if you've done 3 long wear foundation sponsored posts in the last month, again, we are not going to be the 4th. Thank you very much. Think about how much you're doing inside of specific verticals and understand that if you oversaturate that, you make it all less effective, and brands should and will stop working with you inside of that vertical. I would say, you know, for me, once a month in a specific vertical is the absolute max. I would prefer once a quarter. Again, I don't think you can fall in love with a new fragrance every month. I'm sorry, I just don't think you can. Again, as a beauty influencer, can you try a new mascara every month? Absolutely. That's a more, you know, that less expensive products that have less loyalty attached to them lend themselves to that. But most products, I think once a quarter is probably a good baseline. That is the 6 things that we will always look at. There are obviously a lot of other factors, and I want to say the last and maybe most important one, that while we have powerful technology that helps us do this stuff really quickly, end of the day, it always has a human eye on it. Like we will always, the last part of this process is always a person looking at it, understanding, you know, your tone and the kinds of images, the image quality, and you know, the way you talk about things and the length of your captions. So question number 3, what do you do with an abusive brand? So I have talked quite a bit about influencers' behavior towards brands and making sure you don't burn bridges and making sure you're professional and prompt and kind. Bless you, Tim.
Sorry.
But what happens if a brand is being abusive and they're asking for too much? The example here was somebody who accepted a experience in exchange for some posts. They were excited about it. The day before the experience was set to happen, they got a full brief with, you know, what they wanted the captions to be, how many stories they wanted, how many in-feeds they wanted, and she pushed back and said, hey, like, I don't do, you know, this is too much for gifting, so I'm going to pull out. And the brand then started really aggressively hounding the influencer. When you're working with a brand, doesn't matter how big they are, doesn't matter how long they have been around, you need to come to the table as equals. And if you ever feel like a brand is treating you less than, I would walk away from that relationship, even if it was one that was paying a lot of money. That's a lesson I learned from a woman who runs all of the influencer work at Nike. And she was talking about a certain celebrity who they felt like the celebrity wasn't respecting the Nike staff, and so they walked away from that relationship. But how for them it's so important, no matter if it's an up-and-coming athlete or Michael Jordan, that they respect the individual they're working with, and the individual they're working with respects them, and they're on the same level. And if a brand is treating you less than, if they're trying to get stuff out of you that you think is unfair, I would absolutely just politely exit and say, thanks so much for the opportunity. Like right now, this isn't going to work out, and I think it's best to just part ways. A good life rule is just never to get angry over email. You know, if a brand is pissing you off, always, if you're detaching yourself from that, and even if you are totally valid in being like, you are like abusive, you're terrible, all of these things, best to just be polite in writing, because you're just a screenshot away from somebody taking that story and turning it into you being completely unreasonable and totally out of control. And now you're trying to explain this email without all this other context. It just gets you into a very bad situation. So, general James Nord life rule: don't say anything shitty in an email ever. If you want to say something shitty to someone, pick up the phone. If you want to yell at someone or something, like, just do it over the phone. Don't do it over text message. Don't do it over email. So that is one rule. 2, in general, if a brand is gifting you something, an experience or a product, when we do it, we suggest the type of content we might like. We provide a mood board of what we hoped it would look like, but we also understand that by not paying you, we cede control of that post. We cannot give you a full brief. We cannot tell you what your caption could sound like. We make suggestions. We hope that you follow those suggestions, but we are respectful of the fact that there is no contract and there is no payment, and thus we cannot control the outcome of that. That is why we tell our clients to pay. Even if it's a small amount, we tell them to pay so we can control those things. And if a brand is gifting you and they're asking for too much and they're pushing you and trying to control what your post is going to look like or say, I think that is an abusive relationship. I doubt it's going to turn into a paid relationship. And if it doesn't feel good, it probably isn't good. And I would just, again, respectfully walk away. If they've already sent you the product, send it back. Like, do the right thing. Okay? Even if they're pissing you off and you're like, I'm not sending this back, screw them. Send the product back. Never give somebody a reason to say that you screwed them over, right? Like, just, again, in general, in business, like, where you can just like do the right thing, you know, because again, if you don't send that product back and then they screenshot your angry email and say you stole the product from them and freaked out, you lose control of that narrative. Something a lot of people have asked me to comment on in DMs is the Kim K, Scott, whatever the fuck his name is, giveaway. That was apparently $75,000, I think, to enter, and a lot of people got hundreds of thousands of followers. I posted on my Instagram saying, like, I can't believe that Kim would do something so embarrassing and post a fucking loop giveaway. How could the money she would make from that possibly be worth the impact to her brand? And then some people pointed out, well, that is her brand. Like, she has always been shameless. She has always just been like, I'm gonna get paid, I don't give a shit. And I think that Kim has built her career doing things that I think other people looked down at and thought were beneath them, and she has done them incredibly well and become unbelievably wealthy doing it. So I, as a member of the Church of Kim Kardashian, do not feel right taking my Lord's name in vain. And so I will say, while I was initially skeptical, I put my trust in Kim, and I understand that what she is doing is best for Kim's bank account, and that is the guiding principle. And may we all learn a lesson from this and chase that money and not give a shit about what little turds like myself on the internet think about you.